We couldn't afford to.
Couldn't afford to then.
Yeah. No, but I like trusting that moment, you know, when you're there and you shoot.
Christopher Nolan is the kind of director who doesn't just make movies. He builds worlds. From the layered dreams of Inception to the brutal realism of Dunkirk, every film he touches turns into a cinematic event. But buried among the blockbusters and the praise is one project that still bothers him. A film he doesn't talk about often. A film that, despite its critical success, left him with a lingering sense of regret. And the reason? It wasn't the studio. It wasn't the script. It was someone he brought into the project. Someone who, at the time, seemed like a perfect fit, but ended up changing everything. Behind the scenes, creative clashes, misaligned visions, and a performance that Nolan quietly felt missed the mark. All of it added up to one uncomfortable truth. He may have made the wrong call. And he's been trying to move past it ever since. This is the story of the one Christopher Nolan movie he wishes he never made, and the actor who made him regret it. The film Nolan would later feel conflicted about wasn't some obscure project buried in his early career. It was Insomnia, a sleek psychological thriller released in 2002. On the surface, it had all the right ingredients: a gripping storyline, a haunting atmosphere, a dream cast. And for Nolan, it was a major milestone, his first big Hollywood production after the indie success of Memento. This was the moment he stepped into the studio system and proved he could handle the pressure. Insomnia is set in a remote Alaskan town where the sun never sets and secrets never sleep. The story follows Will Dormer, a morally conflicted detective played by Al Pacino, sent to investigate the murder of a teenage girl. But what starts as a routine case quickly spirals into something far more twisted, especially once the killer makes himself known. And this is where things get complicated. The role of the killer, Walter Finch, wasn't handed to a typical Hollywood villain. Instead, Nolan made a decision that shocked fans and critics alike. He cast Robin Williams. Yes, the same Robin Williams beloved for his warmth, his humor, and his larger-than-life energy as the quiet, manipulative murderer. It was a radical departure from the kind of roles Williams was known for. Up to that point, audiences associated him with heartwarming charm in movies like Dead Poets Society, Mrs. Doubtfire, and Good Will Hunting. Sure, he had shown dramatic range before, but never quite like this. Nolan was fascinated by the idea of turning expectations upside down. He believed casting someone so likable in such a chilling role would amplify the unease. And at first, it seemed like a brilliant creative move. Risky, yes, but potentially career-defining for both of them. But once filming began, that decision would start to cast a long shadow. Because while Insomnia would go on to receive solid reviews and box office success, behind the scenes, the dynamic between Nolan and Williams wasn't as seamless as it looked on screen. There were unspoken tensions, creative friction, and a sense that the performance, while praised by critics, didn't fully align with Nolan's original vision for the character. And for a perfectionist like Christopher Nolan, that disconnect was hard to shake. But it wasn't just about the performance. It was what happened during the making of the film that would leave Nolan questioning whether this was a project he ever should have taken on in the first place. And the cracks would start to show behind closed doors. When Robin Williams signed on to play Walter Finch, it felt like a headline-grabbing move. And it was. Williams had been trying to shake the nice guy image for years, and this role gave him a rare opportunity to step into something truly sinister. For Nolan, this was a calculated risk. He wanted someone who could make the audience feel unsettled without ever raising their voice, someone who could charm and chill in the same breath. Williams, in theory, was perfect, and to his credit, he delivered something deeply eerie. His portrayal of Finch was quiet, deliberate, and disturbingly calm. He wasn't the over-the-top psychopath you'd expect. He was worse. He was relatable, the kind of monster who hides in plain sight. Critics applauded the performance. It was subtle, disturbing, and completely different from anything Williams had done before. But that's where the problems began. Because Nolan didn't just want different. He wanted to be terrifying, precise, controlled. And Robin Williams, for all his brilliance, was unpredictable. His mind moved fast, his instincts were wild, and his process didn't always line line up with Nolan's vision. Williams was used to finding characters through spontaneity, improvising, discovering moments on the fly. Nolan, on the other hand, is a meticulous planner. Every shot, every line, every beat is calculated with surgical precision. The clash wasn't explosive. There were no shouting matches or public breakdowns, but behind the scenes, the creative tension was thick. Nolan reportedly struggled to rein in Williams's impulses, while Williams felt boxed in by the rigid structure Nolan required. And when those two energies met on set, the chemistry wasn't always there. At one point, Nolan even admitted that directing Williams was like trying to bottle lightning, a compliment on the surface, but underneath a quiet frustration. And that disconnect would carry into every scene they shot together. From the outside, Insomnia looked like a polished, professional production. There were no dramatic walkouts, no public scandals. But inside the process, Nolan was battling something far trickier, the quiet feeling that things weren't clicking. One of the biggest challenges came during the emotionally tense scenes between Pacino and Williams. These were supposed to be the heart of the film. Two men circling each other like predators, each hiding guilt, each unraveling in their own way. But the tone was off. Nolan wanted cold menace. Williams gave him ambiguity, and every take drifted a little further from the razor-sharp suspense Nolan had in mind. There were also concerns behind the camera. Some crew members later recalled that Nolan seemed more distant during this shoot, more restrained, less experimental. It was clear that the experience wasn't creatively fulfilling for him. He was navigating not just the pressures of a studio film, but also the unpredictability of a lead actor who wasn't following the plan. And because this was Nolan's first time working with Hollywood legends like Al Pacino and Robin Williams, the stakes were high. He couldn't afford to lose control. He couldn't afford for his vision to feel compromised. But the more he pushed for precision, the more the energy on set felt tense, uneasy, and restrained. It wasn't a disaster, but it was far from ideal. By the time production wrapped, Nolan wasn't celebrating. He was relieved, and that's when the doubts started creeping in. Because when a director as calculated as Nolan starts questioning whether a key performance ever truly landed, that regret doesn't just go away. It lingers. And once the film was in the editing room, those questions only got louder. When Insomnia hit theaters, the reviews were solid. Critics praised the atmospheric direction, the icy cinematography, and the unexpected tension between Pacino and Williams. On paper, Nolan had pulled it off. The film made money, the studio was happy, and Robin Williams received serious praise for showing his darker side. But behind closed doors, Nolan wasn't satisfied. In interviews years later, he rarely mentioned Insomnia with the same pride as his other early work. While he acknowledged the experience was a stepping stone in his career, he also hinted at something deeper, something unresolved. He once described the process of making Insomnia as educational, which, coming from Nolan, isn't a compliment. It's a quiet way of saying, I learned what not to do. What bothered him most wasn't the critical reception. It was the feeling that the film never quite became what he envisioned. That despite the talent involved, it missed something essential. The tone felt off. The pacing didn't land as cleanly as he'd hoped. And the performance at the heart of it, the one he'd gambled everything on, left him wondering if he had made a mistake. Nolan never called Williams out by name. He's too professional for that. But he did once admit that giving too much creative control to an actor, especially one with such a powerful presence, can sometimes lead a film away from its original purpose. That's not just regret. That's a lesson learned the hard way. And Nolan took that lesson straight into his next project, with very different results. Insomnia didn't ruin Nolan's career. In fact, it helped launch it. The film gave him credibility in Hollywood, and just a few years later, he was handed the keys to Batman Begins. But the experience changed something in him. From that point forward, Nolan became known for working with actors who aligned closely with his method. Deeply disciplined performers like Christian Bale, Cillian Murphy, and later Robert Pattinson. He also became far more protective of his creative control. On every film after Insomnia, Nolan either wrote or co-wrote the script. He took tighter control over the tone, pacing, and even casting decisions. He learned that trusting his instincts wasn't enough. He had to control every variable. And maybe that's the biggest irony of all. Insomnia, the film that left him questioning himself, also became the turning point that shaped his entire career. It taught him how to navigate the Hollywood system without losing himself in it. It showed him the cost of compromise and the importance of clarity. As for Robin Williams, his performance in Insomnia remains one of the most haunting of his career. But for Nolan, it's a reminder reminder that even the most talented actors aren't always the right fit. And from that moment on, he made sure to never make the same mistake twice. Christopher Nolan doesn't dwell on failure. He doesn't rant about bad experiences or publicly call people out. But if you study the trajectory of his career, one thing becomes crystal clear. Insomnia left a mark. It wasn't a disaster. It wasn't a flop. But for a director obsessed with precision and control, it was a turning point, a lesson wrapped in praise. And the root of that lesson? Trusting someone else's instincts over his own. That film taught Nolan the cost of creative compromise, and he's never forgotten it. Every movie he's made since has been a product of that realization, tightly written, carefully cast, and unmistakably his. It's no coincidence that the name Christopher Nolan became a brand shortly after Insomnia. That was the moment he stopped taking chances on ideas he couldn't fully control and started building worlds where every detail, every line, every frame served one clear vision, his own. But here's the twist. Without Insomnia, without the friction, the discomfort, the quiet regret, would Nolan have become the director we know today? Or did that one uneasy collaboration shape the path to his greatest work? Sometimes, the movies we regret are the ones that teach us who we really are.